All right. So we are live and recording, and I'm super excited about this as usual because it's that time of the month where we get to come together. So welcome everybody to our Kubernetes and Cloud Native Meetup for the Eastern Canadian cities. So we have some exciting news on that front that we will share in a moment, but welcome to our communities in Montreal, Quebec, Toronto, Kitchener-Waterloo, Ottawa, and our newest member, Halifax, that you guys will hear about in a moment. So welcome everybody, salut tout le monde. Feel free, as I mentioned in the chat, to post questions, comments, en anglais ou en français. Vous êtes la bienvenue de vous exprimer dans la langue de votre choix. And if there are any French questions that arise for people who only speak English, we will be there to translate. So let's get going. Today, we have a full agenda on the docket. We're going to be doing a bit of an intro. So that's usually done by us. So that's the organizing committee. So we'll go through a few things around our team that is growing in terms of organizing committee, what's happening in our ecosystem, our speakers, of course, and how to stay connected with us and submit talks. And then we will have two presentations. So the first one is by our dear friend, Mike Foster, who's going to be talking about the new CKS exam from the CNCF. And then we will have another talk about hierarchical namespaces. Say that fast 10 times. Not so easy, by Adrian and Ginny. So that's going to be our second talk. And then at the end, as usual, we have some really awesome prizes. And this week they are brought to, or this month, sorry, they are brought to us by StackRox. So thank you for that. And also by our wonderful ambassador, Archie, who always gets us some CNCF swag. So our wonderful hosts today are myself, Julia. So hi, I work at a company called CloudOps based in Montreal. And these are my co-hosts for today. So we're all going to have different roles. Of course, most of us know Archie already. He's our fearless leader and CNCF ambassador. Then we have Anthony and Suvro, who are going to be also helping with moderating questions and helping do the prize draw and all that fun stuff. And we want to give a shout out to our colleagues who are on our committee. So our committee is growing, and we're really excited because we have a lot of representation from the different cities. We now have 6 cities in our crew, so it's really been nice to have the representation across the board. So thank you to all of you who are on our committee. And a special shout out to Johan, who's joined our committee from the actual east of the Eastern Canadian term in Halifax. So we're super excited to have you on board. And, you know, it's always such a pleasure working with all of you. So typically what we do is we take turns hosting these meetups. So you'll get to know each of us over the course of the next year, months, however long we're going to be doing this online. And of course, we have to give a shout out to our wonderful sponsors. We could not do these without them. Obviously, being online is a bit of a different ballgame, but we're very grateful for the sponsors who help us because the funds that they give us allow for us to create other in-person events, hopefully one day, to have prizes and swag to give out to everybody. So as I mentioned earlier, StackRox has donated a couple of gift cards to us. So thank you to them. And of course, to our other wonderful sponsors. If anyone works at a company or you're just feeling generous and you want to sponsor our meetups, there is a QR code here. So please feel free to scan that and it'll send you to some information around what a sponsorship package looks like. So as mentioned, we have some really exciting talks today. We're always very honored to have people from actually across, I guess, the world now that we're in this virtual reality, come and support our community. So as mentioned, our first little intro here will be CNCF updates from us. And then again, Michael will be chatting about the CKS, and Adrian and Ginny from Google will be talking about hierarchical namespaces. So thank you all for joining our meetup. It's really a pleasure to have you. And yeah, you make this a wonderful experience for everybody. And it's our mission is to really share the knowledge. So thank you very much for supporting our communities. And with that, I will pass the baton over to Archie. Oh, sorry, I think I'm doing the slide. Sorry. We want to hear from all of you. So these are the ways to be in touch with us and to follow what's happening. So we have recently created a LinkedIn page, which sometimes gets a little neglected, but I'm definitely trying to be more active there. I enjoy being on LinkedIn. I know, don't hate. But if anyone wants to join us on LinkedIn, there is a page there, Cloud Native Canada, as well as on Twitter. We have a Twitter handle that is posted here. It's at Cloud Native Canada. And there is this QR code, again, to join our Kubernetes Canada Slack channel. So that's a different Slack channel from the main Kubernetes one, which has many, 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 many people. And ours is growing quite steadily as well. But it's a really wonderful community in there. People are posting articles and asking questions and sharing information. So we welcome you to these three spaces to interact with us and follow what's going on in our world. And as well, we are always looking for not only hearing from you, but also for talks. We really rely on our community. Of course, our sponsors help us, but we definitely rely on our community for content. So we have two types of talks. So one is a story. So it's a success or failure story of what I tried to do. Was it a massive success, or did it fail miserably, and here's what I learned? Either way, we want to hear from you about those stories, and we'd love to have something like that be presented at our meetups. There's also the option of a tech talk, so similar to what Adrian and Ginny will be doing today. So one that is more around, this is a topic, this is how it works, more of a deep dive into a tool or technology. Ideally something that is open and accessible to everybody. So these are the types of talks and content we're looking for. If you have any ideas, suggestions, wanting to join, please don't be shy. Our team is really wonderful and supportive to help guide the CFP process. So if you have any doubts on your proposal or you're not sure, we're here to help you. So please don't be shy. And as we all know, this all started off talking about just Kubernetes, and we have expanded that, of course, because we've kind of gone through a gamut of topics around that. So anything that's related to the CNCF, any of the projects or tools that are involved there, as you can see, Mike is going to be talking about exams that the CNCF is offering. So yeah, we really welcome you with open arms and would love to hear from you. And with that, without further ado, I will pass it to Archie, and he will take it away with some of the rest of the updates.
All right, Juliet. Before I'm going to take the mic completely, do you want to quickly say how people can ask questions, and then that we will moderate them in the tool?
Yeah, actually, I think in this one, the questions go directly in the chat. I know on Zoom, there's a Q&A section, but I will be monitoring the chat, as I think a few of us will be. So if you have any questions for us, when I'm done talking, I will take a look at the chat. And if you have any questions for any of the speakers, please post them in there, and we will make sure that they get answered in function.
Yeah, just open the
Q&A. Sorry, there's a Q&A.
Yeah, so I just opened it, so
okay,
yeah,
perfect.
You can use Q&A as well.
Sorry, I didn't see that. So if you guys are in the chat at the top, there's a Q&A, and there's DMs. So feel free to add any questions into the Q&A section there. There's like 3 little tabs at the top. And thanks for pointing that out. I hadn't seen that, so that's perfect. So if you have questions for our speakers, it's easier for us to queue them up in the Q&A area. So feel free to put those in there, and any other comments, feedback, shout outs, love, whatever you want to give us, all positive, hopefully, or pleasant, I should say, can go in the general chat.
All right, thanks, Julia. Hi, my name is Archie. I'm CNCF ambassador from Canada. Happy to be here organizing this St. Valentine's edition of CNCF Meetup. We really love CNCF, Kubernetes, technologies around, and most importantly, we love you, our community. So happy to be here again. And we have some exciting announcement and news around our Meetup. So I don't know if you see, if this picture is familiar to you, and maybe you're playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla. We're kind of expanding our territories on East. So it's not going to be Essex this time, but we're going to Nova Scotia. And we're having a new member, a new chapter in our Meetups. So we're starting a new Meetup in Halifax. So if you have friends or some companies who is from Halifax, please share with them this news. So we have a local organizer of the event, Johan. So you already saw his picture. He's in our Slack channel if you want to chat with him and maybe offer some help or some ideas how we can organize. But for now, this event in Halifax will be part of our virtual events. But in the future, when the COVID will finish, we will have some local events in Halifax as well. And with that, we have another exciting news. So CNCF kind of reached out to us and they said, hey, you guys kind of doing a great job in organizing all the events in Canada. Why you don't take care of also the Cloud Native Canada kind of chapter? So we're starting a new chapter, which is going to be used mainly right now for central event. So in the future, you'll see the promotion will be done for the Cloud Native Canada. And we're going to be using this Cloud Native chapter for future virtual events when we'll go post-COVID. So we'll continue to organize events in each city as usual, but we will have this virtual link in case we will be having some virtual meetups. So I hope you like this idea, and we know that we keep introducing new changes all the time, but I think this will be a good addition to our meetup. All right, with that, I'm going to go to the CNCF announcements. I hope you were excited about our meetup announcements, but we also have a few CNCF announcements as well. Just like a recap from the last year, it was very difficult to keep up with all the changes in the CNCF landscape. Last year, there was 35 projects has been added to the Sandbox, and I'm sure you're using some of them, and we spoke about some of them already. But it's if you want to share about your journey about CNCF projects, our meetup is welcoming you, and you can always have a chance to present there. All right, and then on top of the Sandbox projects, we had 5 gradated projects: Helm, TKTV, etcd, Harbor, and Rook, which we covered pretty much extensively within our meetups. And there are also a few other new projects has been added to the CNCF landscape. And this is all possible thanks to these people, Technical Oversight Committee, that are working hard to bring new projects every year. So they're voting, they preparing the plan for the new projects to join CNCF. So it's a Technical Oversight Committee, and it consists of different people from different companies, and they've been re-elected every 2 years. And we're excited that there's 5 new members joining from Spotify, Apple, Weaveworks, Alibaba, and CERN. And they will be the TOC members for the next couple of years. Obviously, CNCF is an organization that, helping to promote Cloud Native, but it kind of depends a lot on the external investment. So a lot of companies are gold, silver, platinum sponsors. Google recently also donated $3 million for Google Cloud credits to test Kubernetes in CNCF. We already have some news about 2021. So very popular project in our community, Open Policy Agent, OPA, has been recently graduated in CNCF. For the people who loves Kubernetes, they're using Gatekeeper probably today, and we see more and more projects starting around OPA. I actually wear proudly my hoodie with OPA right now. So hopefully, if you have some interesting stories to share, please let us know. But obviously, Open Policy Agent become a very, very popular tool to use. And if you're trying, for example, use pod security policies, this is today can be done through the OPA and it's deprecated in Kubernetes. So this is one of the ways to use. But like there's many policies that are available right now for Kubernetes in OPA. So if you're trying to build multi-tenancy, if you want to implement some policies in runtime, in networking, Open Policy Agent is probably your best friend today. And it's a huge community around that. So please, be active in this community. We have another project that has been joined actually last year, but like pretty much at the end of the last year, Buildpacks. And we have Anthony who want to share a few updates around this project. Anthony, you want to quickly talk about?
Yeah, sure. So Buildpacks, what are Buildpacks actually? They've been around for a long time. Maybe some of you already know them from back in the days with Heroku, that is a platform as a service. And then also Cloud Foundry started using Buildpacks. Maybe, using Heroku, you remember that you had to git push to Heroku, and then magically your project was being built because it would detect what kind of project, if it's a Java or Python or Node.js project, and then it would choose the right environment, and it would actually build it for you, right? So this is where Buildpacks in the day. But now Buildpacks are more generic, and they have actually joined this, the CNCF as a Sandbox project in 2018. And now they are in incubation, meaning that they are getting traction and they are getting some users and committers from the community. So what are Buildpacks, by the way? It's a spec of which the pack CLI is the default implementation tool. So go ahead, Archie. So in a nutshell, you can use it locally on your machine using the pack CLI. So you can install it on Mac with Brew or on Linux or on Windows as well. And then you just cd into your project. And then you run pack build my project, and pack will download the builder, and this builder will actually organize several build packs in a given order. And each of those build packs, they are going to detect if they apply to this project. So if, for example, it's a Java project, then the Java build pack will probably try to build the project. So once it's detected, then of course the next step is to build the project. And then optionally, they can also, the pack CLI can also push your image to a registry. So this is, pack is the default user experience that you would encounter using Buildpacks. But it's a rich ecosystem with many builders. So actually, you've got a lot of vendors that are providing their own builders. For example, of course, you have Heroku, because historically they were kind of the first, but also you have Cloud Foundry that have renamed their effort into the Paketo Buildpacks, as well as Google Cloud. So of course, if you would deploy to Heroku, you would choose the Buildpack from Heroku. If you go to Google Cloud, you would use the Buildpacks from Google Cloud. But there are not only builders, there are also different implementations. So pack CLI is the default one, but you can actually, you can encounter in the wild many tools such as Tekton, VMware Kpack, HashiCorp Waypoint, that actually know how to use Buildpacks, how to apply Buildpacks to your project. So pack is not the only tool that you can use Buildpacks with. You can use them in a lot of CI tooling already. So yeah, that was it for the quick focus on the Buildpack technology. I believe that it's a great technology actually, and it's really getting traction a lot. If you go to Pivotal Talks or I don't know, also in the Java community, you will see that it's really getting traction more and more. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Anthony. Focus. I'm really excited about this project because you're kind of escaping one extra step in the pipeline. So before we had to create a Docker file and build the image. Now you can completely skip this step and you have your source code in GitHub and you can create an image from that automatically and deploy to Kubernetes, for example, or to Knative or some other project. So it's kind of simplifying a lot the step, and I think the developers especially would be the ones who really take advantage of that, because they not necessarily want to learn Docker or Kubernetes, they want to write the code. So for them, it's kind of simplifies a lot the steps around.
Definitely, and it also allows an organization to enforce the good practices, because you don't let the developers just handle random Docker files that we would find anywhere. You just enforce good practices across your organization using Buildpacks. So this is why it's pretty interesting.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Anthony. I'm going to go continue. And usually, we're covering the latest Kubernetes release. And this release was released actually in 2020, but it was released after the meetup. We organized our last meetup from the KubeCon. So I want to say thank you to the whole community that contributed to this release, and congratulate the release team with releasing the best release of Kubernetes 1.20. It's incredible that we already lived together within all of these 20 releases and organized so many meetups around Kubernetes. This release has 42 enhancements, and there was a lot of work has been done in terms of moving cron jobs to beta and CRI to GA, which will happen shortly in the upcoming 1.21 release. There was a few features that have been graduated, like volume snapshots, runtime classes, support for container, D, and on Windows. In terms of new features, I think graceful node shutdown will be something greatly appreciated by the people who is running Kubernetes in production. Better pod resource request metrics, and container resource based pod autoscaling. So if you're using HPA, it will be able to also take decision based on specific container. Not like, so it's a kind of easier way, not easier, but like more flexible way to do HPA and cover more use cases. But I think the major change for everybody that, discussed a lot in Twitter and media was Docker shim deprecation, right? So we get to the point where when Docker is deprecated from Kubernetes, and there was a lot of fear, people were scared, like, should I learn a new tool? Like, should I stop using Docker? The answer is no. You're still going to be running your Docker containers, Docker images on Kubernetes, but Docker shim itself, that was supposed to be, kind of running Docker itself, it has a lot of toll in terms of maintaining it. So it's been deprecated right now. So you have time until 1.23 to move to Containerd or use Cryo. But also Mirantis, the company which acquired Docker, they will be adding Docker support as a container runtime interface, and they will be supporting it. So there's no much change for many people. It's more would be work on the cloud providers that are using Docker shim today, or maybe the vendors that are using Docker shim. But in terms of change, there's no major changes for end users with this behavior, and you can still run your Docker containers with Kubernetes. And then the next release of 1.21, we're expecting on April 8th. So hopefully next meetup we can cover about it. Some of the important events that are upcoming. May 4th, we are going for next KubeCon EU. It's still going to be online, and we have a code for our community which provides extra 25% discount. Unfortunately, the price went up a few days ago, so it was $10 per ticket. Now it's $75, but it still have this discount. And KubeCon will also host a lot of co-located events that will be sold separately. If you're interested to join any of these events, you can register during the registration to KubeCon itself. So I think this is it for me right now. And Suvro, you want to present Michael?
Hi, everyone. My name is Suvro. I hang out with Archie and the team once in a while. And thank you. Michael today would be talking about the new certification which came out in last KubeCon. Michael is a cloud native advocate at StackRox, and enjoy his talk. Michael, you there?
Awesome, thank you.
I'm super excited to see Michael because I used to work with Michael in the same company and shared the same table with him. So
yeah, and
super excited to see him presenting and working at StackRox.
Yeah, it's awesome. And Julia, and I know we have some ex Cloud Ops people in the chat too. Wojo's here, as well as I think a couple others that Julia pointed out. So yeah, thanks again for having me. You guys can see my screen okay, right? Everything's good? Awesome. So yeah, like that was just touched on, CKS, the new certification from the CNCF. Just kind of want to talk to you about what you need to know, how to get started. It is somewhat of a unique test compared to the CK and CKAD, so I think it's worth covering. So again, what we're going to cover, I'm just going to intro, why these certifications are useful, talk about the exam structure, exam format, break down the individual sections without giving away too much, right? I see, Magno's got some good resources along with Waleed. He's in the chat, so the CKS people are here, which is great. And he's always worth pinging if you have questions. So again, I'm just going to go through the sections, give you resources, not talk too much, and then talk about some general tips that I found really useful for the exam, and I'm sure other people can chime in as well. Feel free to throw some Q&A in the chat too, because we have some Q&A time at the end. So yeah, a little bit about me. So like it was just touched on, Cloud Native Advocate at StackRox. I've done the CK and CKS. Actually, I'm taking the CKD. I've been like a little slacking on it a little bit, but I got a very nice discount when I was at KubeCon. So again, I think part of that early sign up bonus for the KubeCon EU is, I think it's like $10 for full access, and they normally have a lot of discounts on these certs because $300 for cert is kind of a lot. So look for those discounts. Again, always ping me, Twitter, Slack, LinkedIn, the Kubernetes Canada Slack channel. I'm on all those. So, feel free to message me if you have any questions. So yeah, why Kubernetes certs? Just a blank slide, because I think all of us are here because we understand why the CNCF ecosystem is growing, and that's because Kubernetes as an orchestration tool is taking off. And even if you're looking to work, for any of the big providers and you're doing like Cloud Run or Lambda functions or something like that, you're using containers underneath the hood. So understanding the container lifecycle, some of the limitations, how to scale it, how to, manage volumes with it, those are just massive. And now basically the conversation has shifted into security, especially with all of the hacks recently. Security and supply chain security is becoming such a big topic. So the CNCF decided, and rightfully so, that they wanted to come out with a tool with a certification that, just looks at security and really whole lifecycle, right? Because when we're talking security, we're not just talking in Kubernetes. So I think they did a great job. On to exam structure. CKS exam structure is 2 hours long. You have to get 67%. If you go, so this is just pulled straight from the documentation, which I recommend you read. It says 15 to 20 performance-based tasks, but then it kind of gives away how many questions are at the end. So it's basically 15 to 16 questions. The new version, so they just updated the version to 1.20, and it normally trails. So like whenever the release happens, I think it's like 6 weeks or 8 weeks after, they'll update the exam version. Just it's worth knowing so that when you use your study tools, you are using the correct version. Cost $300 USD. You get a free exam retake, which is, I think, awesome and really useful. The cert is valid for 2 years. The CKA and the CKAD, I believe, are both valid for 3 years. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Archie, but I believe they're both valid for 3. One of the reasons for the 2 years is because there are a lot of moving parts of security, like pod security policies just became deprecated, right? And that's originally in the CKS. So I think it's a quicker moving ecosystem, and they want to make sure that people are staying updated. So when it says a 12-month exam eligibility, they mean after you sign up. So if you sign up in November, you have basically till the next November to take your 2 tests. You get a free retake as well if you fail. And then a valid CKA cert is required, and I'll touch on why that is required as I go through the sections, but it is a good policy to have it as required. I think they did a good job with that. So the format, if you have to take the CK to take the CKS, but I'll just, talk about it a little bit to make sure everybody has the same context. You basically get into a pane, go through a bunch of checks to make sure you're not cheating, obviously, and then you get into your exam environment. The exam environment compromises basically a terminal window on your right, and you'll have your question sort of navigation pane on your left. You're allowed two tabs open, so I recommend like 2 monitors. But you'll go through, you'll have a question, you'll get a cluster for each question, and there'll be some sort of task that you need to perform, whether it's on the node, Sometimes it's within Kubernetes. Sometimes you're debugging the master node or the control plane node, sorry, and the worker node. But you'll get an info box and it will walk you through exactly what you need to do. Now, every single question means you have to change the context, right? Because you do have 16 clusters. Make sure that you're aware of that. And know that when you're going to go into each node to debug or look at some different security tools that you can SSH using the node name, you can use kube control when you SSH in. So you have access to all of these applications when you SSH into control plane or worker nodes, which is really useful. If you're debugging something in Kubernetes while you're working on the node, you can use kube control from the node. But it's a very unsecure environment that you're testing in, but it's worthwhile so that you know how to like move through the test in 2 hours. You do have elevated privileges by default, which is great because you basically need to do whatever you need on the node. One thing I will warn people of is don't delete files because there are files and there are configuration files and things like that that are present. Always create or copy new ones. Otherwise, you're in for a rough one. And I think that should be just a self-evident slap on the wrist if you're deleting files on the node. Yeah, you must return to the base node. So if you SSH in, make sure you come out. Nested SSH is not supported. And yeah, you can use kubectl, kubectl to work on any of the clusters. Like I said before, once you get in, you can use kubectl once you're inside. I need to update this because it says 1.1.19. It's actually 1.2 now. So the quarterly update has actually just been pushed. I'm a little late on this. And the VI Vim is the default editor. One thing to note is if you like using gedit or Emacs or Nano, they're not there. You do have privileges, so you can go install them. But let's say you're working through every single node. You don't want to be installing an application on every single node. So it's worth it just getting used to VI and Vim, and especially if you're using the kube control edit function to edit configuration, to edit YAMLs on the fly. VI and Vim is definitely worth it. All right, exam sections. So just going to break down each of the 6 sections, talk about what you need to focus on, and hopefully not give away too much. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. So yeah, section number 1, cluster setup. Network policies to restrict cluster access. Network policies are a must-know if you're going to enforce security across your networks and your Kubernetes clusters. So there are multiple different functionalities. There's the to and from functionality that is new. I think is new in as of 1.17. But really, you're going to need to know, how to do default denies, how to do default allows, how to manage ingress, how to manage egress, how to manage 2 pods, how to manage within namespaces. You need to understand how the permissions and how to configure them so that the pods can talk to each other or not talk to each other. So definitely worth knowing. The CIS Kubernetes benchmarks. So you want to review all the Kubernetes components. One of the tough things about working in something like GKE is you don't see the master nodes, right? The exam uses kubeadm, I believe, to set up, or kubespray, but either way, the Kubernetes components, they're not containerized. They're on the node. You'll be able to go and see their configuration. They're not like on RKE where the components are containerized. So it's worthwhile understanding those components and how the open source configuration sets it up. Because if you've worked in a managed cluster and you've never touched the master nodes, you will feel out of place when you have to go in and debug and figure out these components. So worth knowing that, and also worth knowing all the cluster benchmarks of how to properly set up and maintain your cluster by looking at the configuration files. Ingress objects for security control. So I think Archie touched on this, but maybe it was in like 1.9 or 1.8. But you can have multiple ingress controllers, obviously, in a namespace. So there's a new ingress class as well, functionality where you can specify a default ingress controller when you create an application namespace. Just in general, making sure that pods aren't connecting to the wrong ingress controller is very useful. And then, protecting metadata endpoints and graphic user interfaces, services that shouldn't be there, that should just be a regular occurrence. So section 2, cluster hardening, restricting Kubernetes API access. Like the billion laughs attack, we want to make sure that our API access is vetted and secure. We want to make sure that we know how we're applying role-based access control. And really, RBAC is that core functionality for applying all of our policies, right? Using caution and default accounts. So one of the issues with pod security policies was the default accounts that are associated with them, making sure that we understand default service accounts, default service account tokens, and if they're mounted into pods or not. We want to just make sure that those Kubernetes defaults, we're aware of them and we understand how to mitigate their risk when we're creating new namespaces or letting people into our cluster. And then I think this is great. They snuck this in here, update Kubernetes frequently, because I believe when this came out in KubeCon, most people were still using 1.15, which we're at 1.2.0 now, and 1.15 isn't even supported anymore by the Kubernetes community. And so the cloud providers have done a good job at trying to push people to adopt, the later versions. Even though I know 1.16 had a little bit of an API, but worthwhile to understand that.
Kubernetes community supports only last 3 releases.
Yeah, we support down to 1.18, right? I think.
Well, if we are 120 right now, so technically it should be 117 is the latest support. So yeah, if you're using 1.5, something is wrong.
Oh yeah.
You definitely should migrate.
Mm-hmm. All right, so yeah, definitely a big security issue. So system hardening, reducing OS footprints. It's really interesting how they try to incorporate kind of whole life cycle and outside of Kubernetes into the exam as much as they could. Obviously, like, you're not really creating your base image, but realistically, you'd be wanting a secure base image that you can vet with a minimal attack surface. Managing IAM roles, that was used. It throws some confusion. We don't necessarily mean like Amazon IAM roles or something like that. We just mean RBAC and how it would be applied within Kubernetes. Minimizing external access to the network, that would be, maybe something like you can use open source tools. So maybe something like AppArmor to control access into different processes, or network policies as well. And again, it makes sense. It mentions AppArmor and SecComp. So there are other open source tools, and you're allowed to use the documentation. I'd recommend that you become aware of those tools, as you really are not going to be a security expert, so to speak, unless you understand those tools and their place within the ecosystem. All right, we got 3 more left. So set up appropriate OS level security domains. So PSPs, OPA, security context. I always get a bunch of questions about this, especially because PSPs have become deprecated as of 1.2.1. PSPs enforce security context, right? We're talking security context at the container and pod level, and then we're using PSPs or OPA to enforce those security contexts against our clusters. So whatever the mechanism for enforcing those security contexts, that might change, but the core component doesn't change. Security contexts are here to stay. That being said, you need to know how to apply these different mechanisms, as there still is a conversation about how to best move forward with the application. So like Archie mentioned, Open Policy Agent is worth knowing. Gatekeeper, is worth knowing. And PSPs, as much as they are being deprecated, they're not being deprecated to 1.2.5. You're still probably going to see a good amount of use for them, as a lot of different cloud providers are still have them as part of their ecosystem as well. Managing secrets, that's just, I think, goes without saying. Especially knowing how to interact with secrets and manage the lifecycle, really important. Container runtime, Archie, you mentioned runtime class. Again, with the Docker deprecation of the shim, I think you're going to see a lot of other runtimes pop up. And so you need to know how to, let's say, separate those processes. I can have, gvisor and, a different runtime that's running. You need to know how to use a runtime class to separate those environments and secure them accordingly. Pod-to-pod encryption, MTLS. Don't get too caught up with this. There's a couple different options. Obviously, using something like Ingress, or using a cert or something like that. Understand the concepts and know how to implement them quickly. But I'll get into a little bit more into that towards the end. All right, my favorite section was supply chain security, because really, like, this is kind of the core issue that's cropping up nowadays. So, minimizing base image footprint, securing your supply chain, right? Kubernetes by default pulls from Docker. Don't know how long that's going to be a default, Archie. You can fill me in on that one. But for now, it's still a default that it pulls from Docker Hub. So, setting up your supply chain to make sure that you're basically setting an allow list of the registries you can pull from. Static analysis of user workloads. So Trivy, for example, is mentioned. Falco is mentioned as some open source tools. So enforcing runtime using those tools on the nodes, for example. Trivy, so scanning for known vulnerabilities, you need to know how to use an image scanner, how to apply it, and how to actually make assessments based off of some of the recommendations. And lastly, monitoring, logging, and runtime security. This is the largest slide I have. So you're going to perform behavior analytics. Like I said, that's like a tool like Falco does, right? You're going to detect threats within physical infrastructure apps. This is kind of just a general topic for, hey, we're applying all these to detect threats. And detect all phases of attack regardless of where it occurs. Perform deep analytical information. Basically, what this is trying to get at is audit logging, container scanning, runtime enforcement, applying it, understanding that when you apply a runtime enforcement or something like Falco, and it gives you feedback saying, hey, you're running a process as a root PID, how would you enforce that in Kubernetes? How would you go and figure out what pod that is and make an adjustment accordingly, right? So it's not just, a lot of these questions are like, maybe here's the information, but you have to know what to do with it. Or they might say, hey, we need you to figure out what the information is and actually go and use an enforcement mechanism to stop this malicious actor. All right, general tips. I don't know if I think I'm getting close to time, so I'll try to move through this. And if anybody has any questions, they can hit me up in the Q&A period. But read the documentation. Number one recommendation, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is there and it gets updated regularly. So I recommend you do that. Take your time, read the question, manage your time, because bite off the questions that you understand and that you can read through. It is a timed hands-on exam, which means that as much as you want to rush through things, being accurate counts. So you want to find that balance. My biggest recommendation is to go through and understand it, get hands-on experience with a lot of these tools, and then bookmark what you find the most valuable points are. You can use bookmarks. You can only use the documentation that they're allowed to give you, but you can use bookmarks in your tab. And so I found that really useful because you don't really have a lot of time to be searching through web pages. Recording task progression. So the exam has a little flag option. You can flag questions to return to. I actually found it more useful to flag questions that I was confident in, and then I returned to the questions that I weren't, but it's useful to help you keep track of time. Yeah, so you actually have autocomplete. There is an autocomplete for kube control. Like I said, the CKA is a precursor to the CKS. And one of the reasons for that is because you do things in the CKA like, create YAML files on the fly, use dry run, use basically a lot of these workflow things in Kubernetes. And the CKS sort of like allows you, gives you some of those. So it might give you template files, or it might give you things, because we know that you know how to work with Kubernetes YAML files and objects. The point is, like, do you understand the security aspects of them? So it is a little bit different from the CK in that part, and you should take advantage of that to cut down on those typos. Be provisioned in VI Vim and pay attention to the question context, that kube control config context. Make sure that you're not in the wrong environment, looking at the wrong question, because you can delete some things that you might not have wanted to delete. Never write a YAML from scratch. Learn how to sort through JSON outputs, right? You do have JQ. There's a list of applications that you have on every single node that's available to you. And again, review those systemd basics and review those Kubernetes config files, understand what the open source Kubernetes application looks like. And yeah, try to avoid doing something like on GKE, because you're never really going to get that experience on the node. And resources, just finishing up. So I got a chance to go into Killer SH actually when I'm just looking after my CKAD. I didn't actually use it for the CKS, but I really like that as a resource. I create a personal repository just of the links that I use to prepare, and it's like a little Terraform script that creates a GKE cluster just for me to experiment. Waleed has a great resource. I saw Magno's in here too, Magno Logan. He's got a good resource as well. So there's a lot of people that are willing to help you, and I recommend that either get in touch on Slack. The Kubernetes, the general Kubernetes Slack channel as well has a whole area dedicated to CKA, CKD, and CKS where people would love to help you. So again, get in touch with me, Waleed, Magno, the CNCF community. Everybody wants you to pass and wants you to become more security conscious. So we look forward to hearing from you. And thanks again for having me. Good luck to everybody. I hope you pass first time. If you don't worry, you get that free retake. Use it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Michael. We have one question from Bala Sundaram. Yoshi asked me, his question is there partial scoring available for a question, as there will be subtasks, or all the tasks in a question has to be performed?
That's a good question. I believe that there is some sort of sub scoring now, because there are, but don't quote me on this. One of my biggest gripes, and Archie, don't hate me, is there is not as much, let's say, visibility into the scoring. So when you do the CKA, a lot of it has to be exact. The name of the pod you create has to be exact. And I'd recommend that even when you're creating manifest files, you are very specific in what you write. If they ask for a pod named Nginx, you create a pod named Nginx. That being said, there are questions where you have to create multiple manifest files, and I wouldn't be surprised if as part of like the automated scripting, they're looking and saying, oh, well, they got 3 out of 4 of the files. They just had a mistype. Maybe they'll get 6 out of 8 points, but don't quote me on that. I believe that a lot of the questions it's pass fail.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So I have a question myself, like a free exam retake, is that a subtle way to say that it's very difficult? Everyone's going to fail?
So I actually had a good chat with one of the creators, John Foreman, who works at Accenture, and he said that when they sent out the beta test, and this is like to the security community as a whole, that 55% failed. So
okay.
they've changed it a little bit. I think because people come in and they think they have a hold on security in Kubernetes, but they might not have an understanding of, let's say, all of the security tools that are available and how you would use them to then interact back with Kubernetes, right? A lot of people might be used to working in something like GKE or AKS, where they go to cloud logging and it gives them and says, hey, here's the log. But do they really go and set up the logs themselves, right? If you were to use something like audit logging and like audit policy and K8s, do you actually go and work with that config file and change that config file so that you get different audit logs coming out? So there's a lot of different use cases that I think they highlight all the security around Kubernetes really well. And that, I think, is probably the most challenging. And to be fair, also, the resources haven't necessarily caught up. I know, people like myself at Magno are trying to get the word out there, because as these like Udemy and Killer SH come out, you'll start to see better resources that are emulating the environments, I think, a little bit more. If that makes sense.
We'll let Adrian to start preparing for his presentation. But yeah, I think just trying to be mindful of time. We're going to continue to take questions, and Suvro will be helping to triage the questions. Please continue asking them. It's just for the sake of time to move forward.
Thanks. I'll be in the chat, Archie. And
yes, thanks, Michael. Really, really happy to see you, and we'll be interested to hear when StackRox has been acquired by Red Hat. So I was expecting you wearing a Red Hat today, but it seems still
not official yet. We'll talk soon, Archie. Thanks for having me. Take care.
All the best. Thanks. So yeah, we'll. Suvro, do you want to pass it to Anthony? Anthony, you want to present quickly?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, sure. Now is the time for our second talk about hierarchical namespaces. So we are welcoming today Adrian and Ginny, both software developers from Google. Adrian and Ginny, it's your turn now.
Thanks. So I'm Adrian Ludwin. I have become accustomed to saying the word hierarchical a whole lot over the past year. And I'm from Google Waterloo, which of course is in Kitchener. I personally am in Toronto today and most of the time since the pandemic started. And so is Ginny. So we are spread out, most Waterlooglers are spread out through the GTA and Kitchener-Waterloo corridor. So yeah, I'm an engineer. I work on GKE, Kubernetes Engine, and I'm going to talk a little bit about hierarchical namespaces. Now, some of you may have heard about this before. I presented at KubeCon EU. I gave a seminar last summer about this as well. So I'm going to kind of skip over some of the older stuff or maybe go quickly. And Ginny will be talking about some of the new features that are part of hierarchical namespaces. So why do we have this feature? Well, it's all about multi-tenancy. And so just for those who don't know, let's talk a little bit about why you would want to use multi-tenancy. So Kubernetes at a glance, many of you probably know this. You've got a user, you use something like kubectl or the UI to talk to the control plane, and the control plane has a bunch of nodes with kubelets on them. Now, it's usually not just you. Usually there's a team, and we'll often call that team a tenant. It's kind of like a generalization of a team. Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a group of people, maybe it's multiple teams. Now, the problem starts coming about once you start getting multiple tenants. Like, do you give everybody their own cluster? And if you start giving everybody their own cluster, how does that scale? Who's in charge of operating them all? You end up getting a lot of stuff that's repeated, like a lot of deployments that are repeated. Good luck trying to upgrade them. And so we generally don't want to have too many clusters in one organization. You want to say, like, okay, let's have multiple tenants, and they all talk to the same control plane, and then they have their stuff in different namespaces. So you can apply all that cool, like all of the security policies that we were talking about in the last talk. Now, I don't want to imply that like you should only have one cluster or anything like that, because that's absolutely not true. And this is something that I've heard it said something like, well, Google only has one cluster. This is not true at all. There is no mono cluster. And so when should you use multiple clusters? Well, regionalization is an obvious one. Most clusters are only available in one availability zone or in one region. And so you would want to keep, so if you are deploying in multiple regions, you want multiple clusters. Blast radius is probably a big one. If you want to update from your old 115 cluster to 116, you probably don't want to discover that the API you depend on has been deprecated across all of your prod workloads at the same time. So you're going to want to upgrade Kubernetes one cluster at a time, and there are always other kind of cluster level dependencies that you want. And so you are definitely not going to want a single one. You're going to want, at a minimum, one per environment, development, test, staging, prod. Probably you're going to want at least two in prod, maybe a canary and a regular one. Scalability, this doesn't come up too often, but there are people who run over the limit, which is, I think, 5,000 nodes in open source, 15,000 nodes in some of the distributions. And then there's always like some weird snowflake, there's an acquisition, or there's one team that just went and did things their own way. And it's not always worth it to get everybody onto the same cluster. But if you do want to get onto the same cluster, then there is the multi-tenancy working group, which I am a member of, and which is the owner of the HNC, the Hierarchical Namespace Controller project, as well as several other projects like virtual clusters. And so our goal is to make it easy to support multi-tenancy, which is to say multiple tenants in one cluster. There's another group called SIG multi-cluster, and they will set you up for managing all of your clusters. So let's talk a little bit about namespaces, because namespaces are the foundation of multi-tenancy, and they're the foundation of many of those other policies that we were talking about in the when we were talking about the CKS exam. So namespaces are the primary unit of tenancy in Kubernetes. They don't seem like they do much. They're just like, they might look like just a name. It's kind of like having one level of folder that you can put things into. So on their own, they're not massively useful, but they make all of those other policies possible. So for example, we mentioned secret management as a part of the CKS. And we mentioned, I don't know if we mentioned service accounts. Those are both bound to namespaces with, not only by default, I think that's the only binding that they have. So if there is a service account in a namespace that has access to various resources, any pod that you create, that anybody creates in that namespace, can use any service account. They can all bind to any secret. So if you want to keep some service accounts and pods and secrets separate for separate pods that are created by separate people, your only option is to use namespaces. And so that is why, that's at a bare minimum, that's going to be the reason you want to use namespaces. By the way, namespaces only isolate the control plane. They do not isolate the data plane. So for example, if you've got a vulnerability in your container or in Docker or Containerd, and you've got something that can attack other things on the node, namespaces are not going to help you use gvisor or Kata container for something else like that. Out of scope for this talk. Other features do not necessarily require namespaces exactly, but they sure work better with them. RBAC, I think the only way you can scope object creation is at the namespace level. I might be wrong on that. I have not passed the CKS exam myself. Maybe I should. But certainly all of the other RBAC operations, even though you can target them to individual objects with individual names, don't do that. It's just going to be a pain for you. So you're definitely going to want to do that at the namespace level. Resource quotas, limit ranges, they apply to namespaces. Network policies, which we mentioned in the last talk as well, they can be more finely targeted, but they do use namespace boundaries by default as well. The one caveat there is that they require labels on those namespaces, which are typically not secure, although I'm not going to get into it. Hierarchical namespaces actually gives you a version of labels that are secure. So what if you want to use policies across namespaces? As I mentioned, namespaces are flat within one cluster. It's as though you only get one level of folders. And so what happens if you want policies that can apply to groups of namespaces? So traditionally, you would need some tool and a source of truth that's outside of Kubernetes, like Flux, Argo, config sync, et cetera. And alternatively, there are some tools that have this kind of idea of account, or project, like an OpenShift, or tenant. And so kiosk is one example of that, the tenant CRD. But what we thought there was a space for was something that both has the source of truth inside Kubernetes. And so, for example, there's no dependency on Git, which all of those first set of tools have, or some source control, and doesn't involve some entirely new concept like project or tenant. We wanted to do something where, because everything was already based on namespaces, let's extend namespaces instead of introducing something entirely new. So that's what hierarchical namespaces are. They are provided by an add-on to your cluster called HNC, the Hierarchical Namespace Controller. This is not going to be a core part of Kubernetes for the foreseeable future. It is an add-on. And all hierarchical namespaces are also regular namespaces. What this does is it lets you express an ownership relationship between parents and children. And what that does is it allows you to propagate policies across them. The default way of doing this is that they simply get copied. So if you put an RBAC policy in org1, it will get copied to team A and team B and all of the services, but not, say, to team C. Ditto for secrets and anything else. HNC can propagate any object type. We don't recommend propagating pods. That will be bad for you. By default, it just says RBAC objects, but you can add anything else. So yeah, as I mentioned, entirely Kubernetes native, but compatible with GitOps tools. You don't have to use Git, you can. As I mentioned, it has cascading policies. It also allows you to create sub namespaces, which is just to say a regular namespace, but it's created underneath an existing namespace, so all of the policies get applied to it. So you can actually give people the permission to create a sub namespace in one hierarchy, but not another. Trusted labels for policy application. HNC puts a bunch of labels on all of your namespaces and forbids anybody from changing them. That makes them safe to use for things like network policies, because even if somebody has permission to, say, add some other label or some other annotation onto a namespace, they will not be able to change this one. And so there are a small number of labels that it adds that you can depend on 100%. It's also easy to extend and integrate because of those labels. Now, the problem with hierarchies is that they can be very limiting, because you can express exactly one type of ownership, one kind of hierarchy, and one way that the things get propagated, and that can often be too limiting. And so that is where our next topic comes in, which, oh, sorry, I need to continue sharing my screen, which are exceptions. And so I'm going to let Ginny, my coworker, take over. So Ginny, go ahead.
Thank you, Adrian. Hi, everyone. I'm Ginny. I work at Google in the HNC team, especially on the exceptions feature with Adrian. And today we're going to talk about the exceptions. And to understand what exceptions is, let's first look at an example org structure. So here we have the team A, B, C, and the playground, all within the end department. And each box here is also a namespace. And team A, B, and C are our internal teams, but the playground can be accessed by anyone outside this department. Next slide, please. So here's an example case where there are some common secrets in the Eng department that any prod workload can access. Click, please. However, we don't want to share it with the playground, which otherwise inherits lots of policies from the Eng department. So we need to make sure there's a way to prevent our real secret from propagating to the playground. Next slide, please. So let's look at another example. The common resource quota is shared with all the teams, but the team B needs more generous quotas than the other namespaces. In this case, first of all, we don't want to restrict team B with the common quota. And moreover, we don't want to put the replacement quota in team B, since there are users with admin privileges in that namespace who should not be allowed to set their own quotas. Click, please. And instead, we want to create the team BRQ resource quota in the Eng department while only propagating it to team B. And how do we do this? Next slide, please. So the solution is the exceptions. Exceptions annotations allows you to limit the propagation of an object to descendant namespaces. And to understand how exceptions work, let's look at a demo here. I'm just gonna start sharing my screen.
Go for it.
Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep, that's good.
Perfect. First, we will be creating the team's architecture as we just talked about in the first scenario. For this, I'm just gonna cheat a little bit. I'm copying and pasting the comment I have in another doc. So here, let's create the architecture. Perfect. And now let's verify the structure. We do this by saying kubectl HNS tree, and it shows the architecture of the Eng department, where playground, team A, B, and C are all the subnamespaces under the Eng department, which is exactly what we want. And for those of you who are new to HNC, just note this subnamespaces are also real subnamespaces, as we can say when we say kubectl get namespace. And we can say those subnamespaces right here. Okay. Now let's clear the screen, and we will be creating the secret we talked about in the first scenario. We are doing this by creating the secret within the Eng department, and we give it a name called real secret. And note that for the demo purpose, we're using some fake credential data. But of course, in the real scenario, you'll be using your own credential. Great, we have already created a secret, and now we will be asking HNC to propagate the secret for us. We do this by set the resource type secret to the mode propagate. Now, let's verify if the secret has been propagated to the subnamespaces. We will just choose a random team as an example. Here, I'll just choose team A. And we can say the secret that we just created has been propagated to the team A namespace. And let's check if it's already in the playground. So as you can see here, without using the exceptions, the secret is propagated to all namespaces, including the playground. And now we will be using the exceptions to prevent the secret from propagating to the playground. Okay, we do this by adding the exceptions annotation here. This is our exceptions annotation. And we're using the tree select here, which allows us to select and deselect any namespace and its descendants. And exceptions also can select on labels, as well as letting you turn off the propagation completely, which you can just read more about in our HNC user guide. Now we have added the exceptions annotation onto our secret. Let's check if it's gone in the playground. We do a get secret once more, and we cannot say the real secret anymore. But we also want to make sure that the secret is propagated to other namespaces, which is team A, B, and C. And we just list team A as an example. So great. We just used exceptions to limit our propagation of the secret. Can we go back to the slides, please, Adrian?
Got it?
Perfect. So to learn more about the exceptions feature, you can visit our HNC user guide in our GitHub repo, or you can just Google for HNC v0.7 exceptions. And now I'll hand over back to Adrian.
Thanks, Jenny. We will also try to post a PDF version of these slides so that some of these links will actually be clickable as well. I'm just going to talk very briefly about HNC because people ask us things such as like, when can I use this in prod? Because as Ginny just mentioned, we're version 0.7 right now. Is this something I should be using? So with the addition of exceptions, we actually believe that we're pretty much feature complete now for our first our first prod-worthy release. This doesn't mean that we will refuse new features, but we're not planning on adding any more. And so really what we want to do is things like stability and feature proofing. So for example, we have been using some of the older versions of the APIs like v1 beta 1 for CRD. Those have been deprecated, I think in 1.19 or so, not removed, but deprecated. So we do want to get onto the latest version of all of those. As I said, we want to add things like stability, make sure that none of our webhooks are applying to sensitive namespaces like kubesystem, so that you can't take down your cluster. Those will all be coming fairly shortly. And also, if there are usability improvements that we need to make, then those are great too. We're considering moving to our own repo under Kubernetes 6. We actually have permission to do this now, but I don't know if it's actually, I don't think it's necessary for 1.0. If you want to get involved, if you want to help, the most important thing that we would love your help with is just by using it. Try it out, use it, not necessarily in prod if it's something that's very sensitive that you're running right now, but we are at the point where you should be able to install it and use it, and it should work the way you expect it to. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this. You can go to GitHub. The latest release is version 0.7. You can check out all of our documentation and our quick starts, and install HNC in a couple of lines. You can get the plugin that Ginny demonstrated, the HNS plugin from Crew. If you're using GKE, then you can install it through Hierarchy Controller, which is our free kind of enterprise-ready version of HNC. It has a couple of additional features like GitOps, like kind of native GitOps integration, hierarchical observability, so that you can filter your pods and the records. Hierarchical resource quota is coming soon, so this is the idea where you can actually share your quota natively across multiple namespaces. And then multi-cluster installation management, which Ginny is hard at work on right now and should be available probably by the end of March. Not sure exactly when that will roll out. But either of those methods, please do check it out and try it out and give us all of the feedback that you can. If you feel like coding, that's great too. We have a couple of a couple of milestones, the HNC 0.8 and HNC backlog milestone, and feel free to pick them up or just give us a shout on Slack or any of the ways through the multi-tenancy working group. If you want to learn more, I gave a talk at KubeCon EU called Multi-Tenant Clusters with Hierarchical Namespaces, a webinar earlier in the year called Better Walls Make Better Tenants. These are both available on YouTube. And also thank God it's Kubernetes folks from VMware gave a demonstration called Let's Try HNC in September. And that was a long one, so maybe turn it on and watch it at double speed. But it's a fun exploration of just how easy HNC is to use, because I was pretty happy with, even though he hadn't read any of the documentation, he was able to get it up and running right away. That is our presentation for now, and so I think that we've got a couple of minutes more. And how do we want to do Q&A?
Yeah, thank you very much, Adrian and Ginny. And yeah, about Q&A, we have at least 5 questions already. So let me read to you the first one. It's Michael who is asking, what are your thoughts on cell architecture? That is sharding clusters by application sets or purpose-specific use, in addition to HNS.
Anthony,
multi-tenancy.
Can I just promote that, for the survey, I think we finished with talks, so please fill out the survey, answer the questions, and get your prize. At the end, we're going to make a draw. Thanks.
Okay, thoughts on cell architecture. As I said, these are tools for you to use, namespaces, hierarchical namespaces, multi-cluster. So yeah, by all means, go shard your applications by cluster if it meets one of those needs that I mentioned earlier. So regionality, blast radius, scalability, those are all good reasons. Blast radius is probably going to be the biggest one, but sometimes scalability can be an issue if you've got noisy neighbors, for example, or very high bandwidth, and you want to really segregate stuff, like some of your applications from other applications. So yes, by all means, use that architecture where it makes sense for you. That's not really much of an answer, but I would say that I would go back to those 4 principles and say, if any of those things are true and you need to use multiple clusters, by all means, go for it. And we do, I think there are tons of tools, both open source and proprietary on whatever platform you're on, that can help you with that.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. We get the second question from Andrew. Andrew was wondering if he was to make a change to a secret in a child namespace, would that secret propagate to other namespaces in the tree, or is it locked to the parent namespace?
Well, it depends where that secret comes from. If the secret is in the parent namespace, you are not allowed to make changes to it in the child, because this is really about policy enforcement. And so it's not really enforceable if anybody can change it. Now, with that said, now that we have exceptions, you could ask your friendly cluster administrator to not propagate that secret to your namespace, and then you can replace it with another secret of the same name, and then it actually would be propagated to its own children. But by and large, unless you use exceptions, if you create an object in a parent namespace, it gets propagated to all of the descendants, and you are not allowed to change it.
Well, thank you, Adrian. This question is from me. I was wondering if there was a UI available that could display graphically the propagation in place. Just think like the Kubernetes dashboard extension for hierarchical namespaces, for example.
So no, there are no UIs to the best of my knowledge today. There's the kubectl HNS plugin, and so that's what we offer. I don't know of anybody, including GKE, I don't know of anybody who is displaying this stuff natively yet, but it's something that as adoption goes up, I can see happening then.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Samir. Samir was asking that while propagating secrets using exceptions, is there a way to get feedback on which namespaces it was applied and to which it wasn't applied to?
No, there is nothing like that. That's an interesting idea. Exceptions are so new that I don't think we've had a demand for that yet. Any object that has been propagated, you can look at it and it will have an annotation saying where it came from, but there's nothing that goes in the opposite direction. So yeah, if there's a demand for that, that's the kind of thing we could look at adding.
Thank you. We had also a question from Ziguan. She was asking if you can apply network policy across different namespaces with labels.
So yes, you can. Network policies do support labels, and so you absolutely can. Well, okay, let me rephrase. You cannot share a network policy across namespaces. A network policy lives in exactly one namespace. So if you want to have a group of namespaces that have the same policy, you have to use something like HNC or something outside of Kubernetes. However, with that said, network policies can apply to pods that come from namespaces, and you can select those namespaces with labels. So you can say, for example, only allow traffic from a namespace that's marked as prod, but don't allow traffic from a namespace that's marked as staging. Not that I recommend putting both of those in the same cluster, but for example, you could do that. So HNC doesn't actually add anything to network policies, but what it does do is it adds those trusted labels that you cannot, that nobody can modify, that reflects the hierarchy itself. And so you can switch on saying, you can say, for example, like only allow traffic from namespaces that are owned by this team. And that's the kind of thing that it lets you do. I hope that answers your question. You can follow up with me on Slack or on the working group, the multi-tenancy working group mailing list later if you like.
Thanks, Adrian. We have a last question. It's from Joan, and I think it's kind of the same topic as the previous question. He was wondering if hierarchical namespaces plus network policies would provide all that is needed to achieve a multi-tier architecture. For example, with a proxy tier, application tier, and database tier. It's something that comes up often in government use cases.
I wouldn't say, certainly HNC is not a cure-all any more than namespaces themselves are. So I would not say that it provides you with all you need, but it's probably a good starting point because, for example, let's say you've got a multi-tier application and you want to have multiple multi-tier applications in the same cluster. Certainly putting, like creating a parent namespace for each of those applications would be useful because then you can put all of the different components into different child namespaces and have a common set of policies applying to all of them, as well as using those labels to restrict them based on RBAC, to restrict traffic based on the hierarchy that you're in, as well as any other criteria that you might like as well. So while I wouldn't say it gives you all you need, it's probably a really good starting point for that kind of architecture.
Well, thank you very much, Adrian and Ginny.
Thanks, Anthony. Adrian, I'm personally very excited about this feature, probably one of the most exciting things I've seen in Kubernetes lately. And for some reason, I noticed that Kubernetes community doesn't spend a lot of attention for multi-tenancy. I don't know why, but like I think it's been like difficult from the beginning. It's still difficult for many people, and like I think the HNC is kind of a good starting point for many new things. And you know, obviously having UIs would be really nice. I want to ask, is it very similar to like OpenShift had a thing, something called project, and Rancher as well had a project kind of a notion on top of Kubernetes? Is that very similar to that?
Yeah, it is. It's certainly, so HNC is patterned after a couple of things. So I wouldn't call OpenShift projects like a direct influence, but it's certainly something that we knew about. The more direct influence is actually from a product called Anthos Config Management, which comes out of Google. There's now a free version of it called Config Sync as well. And it kind of introduced this idea of hierarchical application of policies. So OpenShift projects, to the best of my knowledge, you can have basically, it adds exactly one level of hierarchy. So you can now have like a grouping of namespaces. But I don't believe you can have a grouping of projects, to the best of my knowledge. And it does require that you have this additional idea that is not, that is different from the Kubernetes built-ins. And so what we tried to do is we tried to generalize these concepts. So config sync or Anthos config management is kind of nice, but all of that inheritance has to be expressed in Git as files and directories. None of it's actually done on the cluster. The intermediate namespaces don't even actually show up on the final cluster. So we took inspiration from a couple of things, and we tried to build something that was as minimal as possible while still to extend the sort of built-in concept of namespaces while giving you this freedom. So for example, you can have any number of levels of hierarchy with HNC. I don't recommend going too high. I think that 2 is going to be enough for many people. If you start going above 4, I'm going to probably start asking you if this is really the best way to structure your hierarchy, structure your cluster. But certainly knowing that you have the ability to do that is nice, and without having to understand this concept that is, you know, particular to one distribution. So yeah, multi-tenancy is hard because there's no standard way to even think about tenancy, and that is the other reason why, instead of trying to create a new concept on tenant or project, we just tried to extend the building block to make this as broadly applicable as possible.
Yeah, and it's fully open source Kubernetes, right? So you don't have to really worry about lock-in, in a sense that this feature will be part of the Kubernetes all the time, and anybody can, you know, write a cap and add additional features. If you want to write something, you know, you're welcome to do that.
Exactly. It's not part of the core distribution, but it is open source. It's part of the SIGs. It's going to have its own SIG repo fairly soon. We're going to be very shortly under the authority of SIG auth. So it'll be just like controller runtime or any other project that's not actually part of the core Kubernetes distribution, but it is part of the core Kubernetes. It is part of the Kubernetes SIGs projects.
If I might jump in here, I think this is awesome, especially for research on the research side for open source. Like if researchers want to get into Kubernetes and they don't have the money, let's say, to do something like OpenShift, right? Like just figuring out how to manage a bunch of researchers in a multi-tenant way that makes sense to administrators. I think it's a great way to be spending time. I think there's a huge use case and upside for it. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think one of the, like a lot of people were asking how to do delegation. Like you have a DevOps team that creates namespace, how you can delegate your users to create namespace. This is a really good answer for that too.
Yeah, you can even delegate the sub namespace creation. So we distinguish between, you can take existing namespaces and arrange them into a hierarchy. We call those full namespaces. You can also create a little object called an anchor in an existing namespace, and that will automatically create a child namespace for you. We call those sub namespaces. They're locked to the parent, but you can delegate the creation of them. And because you can only create them in limited places, they become bound by any of the constraints, any of the policies that are applied to the parent. So it really does make it easier for you to delegate the administration. You can even give the person like full cluster admin privileges in the child namespace. And as Ginny showed with exceptions, they do not have permission to override anything that comes out of the parent, even though they otherwise have full permission to create any object in that namespace.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adrian, for nice presentation, and Ginny for nice demo, and thanks to Kubernetes community also for contributing this new functionality. We're going to the fun part where we're going to draw some prizes. So the first two prizes are going to be AWS cards from StackRox. So we're going for the first one. Drum rolls. We have 40 people who submitted the survey. All right, Borko is getting the first one. Congrats, Borko. The second prize also a card from StackRox, $50. I wonder if we have a winner who can win two prizes at the same time. All right, congrats, Brad. And now we're going for Kubernetes hats. I have it here with me. I'm not going to open them, but we're going to ship to your home address. Thanks for filling up the surveys who participated. All right, Michael, congrats. We're going for another hat. Thibaut, congrats. Oh no, it's Othman. Sorry. Somehow it changed the last minute. All right. That's very weird, huh? Here it shows Thibaut, and then it shows as Othman Habli. Not sure what we're gonna do about it, but maybe we can send prizes for both, just so that they feel happy. All right. Okay, now we're going for Kubernetes mask, like this. Still very popular during the COVID times. Ralph, congrats. And then final mask going to, oh wow. So our Halifax organizer is getting a mask. That's nice. Congrats. Johan. I think with this, we're going to conclude our meetup. Thank you very much. We planning our next event, and we actually talked to Argo CD community, and we're going to have one of the project managers from Intuit who want to be speaking about Argo CD, future roadmaps, and what's the community doing with Argo CD. It would be very interesting to know what you want to learn about Argo CD, but stay tuned for our next event. We're planning maybe something around March, or it could be also Elastic who will be presenting. So we're still like in the planning phase, but we want to thank everybody who joined us today. Congrats to the winners, and thank you to Ginny, Adrian, and Michael for presenting at our events. And thanks to the amazing team of organizers who are helping us to build such a nice event. And we're looking forward to see you next time. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Giving you back time for lunch.